This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale, I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to welcome back Caroline Young. Hi Caroline.
Hi John, hi, thanks for having me again.
It's a real pleasure. Listeners will remember that we had Caroline, I think it must have been like 2 years ago.
I think it was 2022, so
Right.
that it's actually 3 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't believe I've been doing Writers on Film for that long. And we were talking about your book about hagsploitation movies. Can you remind me of the title of the book, please?
Yes, it's called Crazy Old Ladies, the story of hag horror.
And so, in a sense, your new book is kind of almost like a sequel, right? Single and Psycho, How Pop Culture Created the Unstable Single Woman.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's kind of a sequel, actually, because it came from my thought. So when I was writing Crazy Old Ladies, obviously it focused on the 60s and 70s. But then I was thinking about more recent horror movies and how those themes are now sort of applicable to contemporary horrors. And I thought that was really interesting, why suddenly there's a resurgence in this idea of the kind of the grotesque hag, and films like Barbarian, like X. So it got me thinking about that, and also I thought about younger crazy women as well, and that's really where the idea came from. And like Fatal Attraction and The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, and all the films that I love that I didn't put in that book, but that I wanted to explore further.
So it's sort of like all the films that you sort of go underneath your sort of cut-off age. You just think, right, now I can sort them. But it's interesting because there is an interesting bit in your book where the single lady can become the spinster, and so can then become like the Miss Havisham that you describe, the crazy old lady. Although it was a really interesting point that I think you say that Miss Havisham is, what, 40s, in her 40s?
Yeah, she's supposed to be in her early 40s. So, yeah, this idea, I mean, that's always the case. It's like this idea of the kind of, the sort of, when we think of the kind of grotesque hag, we assume older, but often it's she's in her 40s, so which is kind of a bit depressing. But there we go.
Bit rude.
It is a bit rude.
I mean, in both your books as well, you're really dealing with. I mean, the overarching theme is misogyny in cinema. I think I think that is fair to say. Can you talk a little bit as well about how that theme relates specifically to Single and Psycho?
Yeah, well, firstly, when I was writing the book, it's not like I'm sort of chastising these films like, well, it's terrible, I mean, I enjoy watching these movies and I take it in the sense of fun, but it's also really interesting how they reflect society. And I think that kind of ingrained misogyny about how women who are single and women who don't have children are treated, and how they've always been treated. And, there's plenty of reasons for this, partly a sort of backlash against feminism, and also this idea of, like keeping women in their place. And then there's people, I suppose, who actually believe that it's a woman's duty to populate the world, and that's her role and that's her only role. And I suppose all that messaging really comes out in pop culture. So in the 80s there was this backlash against feminism of the 1970s. It was almost like, okay, that job's done, but now actually what are the consequences of all these women like demanding their rights? Now it's children being neglected, women not having babies, leaving it too late. There was all this kind of scaremongering, that there was a famous article that said that a woman over 40 was more likely to be killed in a terrorist attack than get married. And so it was like, I think it was a made up stat, but people actually took this on face value, and it kind of people got really scared. And that was reflected in the films of that time, like Fatal Attraction and Someone to Watch Over Me, and all those kind of thrillers of the late 1980s. So yeah,
that statistic even comes up. You mention it as coming up in, like, I think it's Sleepless in Seattle, or one of those rom-coms.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so they're discussing it. So Meg Ryan and Rosie O'Donnell, they're journalists, and so they're discussing it with their two male colleagues, and they kind of dismiss it. But it's sort of part of it. It's become so much part of the culture of the time that people referred to it and knew what that reference was about.
I mean, that's crazy that it should be, so I mean, it's a little bit like the idea of bra burning. I remember reading once that bra burning never happened. It was a conflation of of feminists deciding we don't want to wear uncomfortable underwear. That really is for the convenience of men being, either attracted or and draft people burning their draft cards,
right?
And so it was those two things being put together that people said, oh, the next thing that's going to happen is women are going to be burning their bras, and that became women are burning their bras.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it sort of got conflated.
Yeah, it's a strange cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
So going back to, like, you said at the beginning, and we've already sort of referred back to it a couple of times. So let's dive into sort of Fatal Attraction as this sort of movie of this thesis, and the one which brings out the phrase bunny boiler. Maybe you could explain this to some. I don't know how big Fatal Attraction will still be in the. I mean, I remember it very much, but let's explain it just in case people haven't seen it.
Well, so interestingly enough, I was chatting to a former work colleague of mine. I think he's like 30, something like that. And I was talking about this book, and I mentioned bunny boiler, and he didn't know where it came from. He knew exactly what it was. It was like just a way to describe a crazy woman, this sort of obsessive crazy woman. But he didn't know it came from Fatal Attraction. So what it refers to is Glenn Close's character, Alex Forrest, to torment Michael Douglas, and to torment his family. She kills the pet rabbit and she boils it and leaves it on the stove. And it's kind of the culmination of her obsessive psychotic behavior, which now she's come into the home and now she's threatening the family. And I think it's interesting as well because it ties into this notion of the witch. So the witch always boils things in cauldron. In Macbeth, the three witches are throwing like things like newts and toads and things into the cauldron. And I think the idea of boiling the bunny, it really taps into that witch-like behavior. And you could also say with the name Alex Forrest, the idea of Sabbath. I think she's the witch, and that idea of bunny boiler just caught on, and the expression just a couple of years later, the expression started to be used in terms of just referring to any woman who's exhibiting slightly crazy stalkerish traits.
I wonder if people are being called baby reindeers now.
Well, yes, because that is the updated version. I wonder. Yeah, I've not seen it, but it wouldn't surprise me.
I must admit, I thought that immediately after I watched Adolescence. I thought any young boy called Jamie in school is going to get so much shit tomorrow, because it's just that's your name for the next. That's what you're going to have to deal with for the rest of the time. So, I mean, one of the things that I thought was very interesting that you brought up in your book, and I remember reading all this also in the book, Is That a Gun in Your Pocket, which was all about the female producers and heads of studios who became very powerful. And the person who was responsible for commissioning Fatal Attraction was one of those powerful women who had not taken over, but who had risen in the 1980s, Sherry Lansing, right?
That's right. Yeah, she was very high up at Paramount, and she had seen a short film from 1979 called Diversion, written and directed by James Dearden, and she felt like she really connected with it. She felt like she was the woman in this film who's has an affair, a one-night stand with a married man, and then he sort of says, it was one night, but that's it. And she gets, she's so frustrated at this man rejecting her, and Sherry Lansing really connected with that. She felt like she'd been there, she'd experienced that sort of being dismissed by somebody, and so she asked James Dearden to create a full-length feature, and he moved it from London to New York and it morphed into Fatal Attraction. And as he was going, Paramount really wanted to make Alex much more evil in a way, and the wife more pure. So that all kind of evolved as well.
Because if I remember rightly, in the original sort of script, and even right through to like them filming the ending and things like that, you mentioned this in your book, there was more sense that the Michael Douglas character there was more of a he said she said to it, that the Michael Douglas character was a bit of a shit, and Alex had more, you felt more empathy or sympathy for her than you did in the final film.
Yeah, they really sort of wanted to kind of create this sense of the sort of sacrosanct of the family as well. And there was also, when they tested the original ending where Alex, she kills herself in what was the original ending. And the audience, apparently, when they were watching it, they really felt like they wanted her to be punished. And yeah, so they changed the ending to make it kind of much more sort of horror movie-esque than what the original intention was. And then right at the end, the camera then focuses on the happy family, the picture of the happy family. That's interesting because it taps into what films in the 1980s and the mid 1980s going onwards were all about. It was about family values, and even when you watch action movies like Aliens, it's obviously got this idea of the kind of the family. And I was watching Die Hard 2, and it's interesting because Bruce Willis is all these women are attracted to him, but he always points to his wedding ring. So he's always like, I'm taken, even though all these women like really are after him. So yeah, it reflected that sense of holding on to family values, and the woman has to be punished.
Yeah. And in the original Die Hard, it's all about him trying to get his family together, and he's upset that his wife is using her maiden name.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's so interesting when you watch films of that era, and you can just really see that push for the family values at that time.
And of course, in a way, this idea that sort of manifestation of Alex and then some of the other later people that you bring up in your book, the Rebecca de Mornay's character in The Hand That Rocked the Cradle and Poison Ivy, but you sort of take it back as well to like the figure of the femme fatale.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I really wanted to look at the 1940s, early 1940s as well. This idea of the femme fatale, which really sort of tapped into the wartime anxiety and the fears, when men were away fighting in the war. It was, this idea of what are women up to when we're not here. So that was where the femme fatale came from. And there was an interesting film called I Wanted Wings, which is like a kind of Air Force drama, and it was Veronica Lake's first role, and she plays this sort of stereotypical psychotic girlfriend character. So it's all the tropes are kind of there: calling too much, stalking. She even pretends to be pregnant, and it's all those tropes that are then sort of shown in Fatal Attraction all those years later.
This was a theme that ran through your whole book as I was reading it, actually. I kept thinking, 'twas ever so, because it feels like even as you're moving through decades, not years, but decades, it seems like it's the same preoccupation, the same paranoia, the same sexism. It doesn't feel like we're really making that much progress at times.
Yeah, and I think if we do make progress, we kind of go back again. So yeah, it's interesting. It's we're now experiencing this kind of backlash against the 2010s feminism and the Me Too movement, and I think it's coming back full throttle, where this idea that feminism has gone too far, and all the stuff about tradwives and this idea of decreasing populations, and how it's women's duty to kind of keep the birth rates up and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think we're definitely like seeing a reflection of what it was like in the 1980s, I think.
And also that combined with racism, with the recent Sydney Sweeney situation, where you have this idea that, I felt a bit, I had a bit of a sick in my mouth when J.D. Vance referred to her as an all-American woman, and Trump was talking about her being hot, whereas Taylor Swift isn't hot. And it's just like, oh, geez,
I know.
God almighty.
Well, I mean, he would think that Taylor Swift was hot if she was a Republican. That's the thing. It's like,
absolutely.
Yeah. So,
and
unfortunately for
maybe
them,
a bit younger as well.
Yeah, there is that. Yeah, because she was, described as the childless cat lady as well, and Taylor Swift played up to that by posing with her cats. So yeah, she went through. I mentioned in the book that she kind of goes through all that as well. This sort of being derided for dating too much. For she was described as being a sort of fatal attraction type for various things that she was doing back when she was younger.
I thought that was absolutely brilliant in the book, how you were able to expand into all these other sort of that these ideas were hitting cinema, but they were also, as you say, hitting popular culture just generally. And it's so hypocritical because I remember listening to, there are male recording artists who have entire albums which are divorce albums. That Bob Dylan did an entire album of just divorce songs about how much he hates his ex-wife, and nobody bats an eyelid. And yet when Taylor Swift does a song about Jake Gyllenhaal, who I think is going to be okay, everybody, throws a tizzy.
I know, yeah, and just she was always. Well, I suppose a lot of her songs are about real people, but she never really named the names. But it's always this idea that this is what she always does. She always names past relationships, and so she's she's dating too much, and men don't get that same criticism. Like Harry Styles, for example, he's had so many girlfriends, and I'm sure he writes about them in his songs as well.
So we have the femme fatale, and we have Fatal Attraction sort of reinventing the femme fatale to some degree. I mean, in a way, I mean, that's also what's interesting is when you first see Glenn Close, she is someone who is kind of sexy. I mean, there is this attraction repulsion thing of we're having love in an elevator, as Aerosmith would sing, and then the next minute we're sort of fighting and killing each other. And so there's this sort of push and pull element to all of these films, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think that's so she sort of starts off as this really in control, dominant woman. She's wearing this kind of glistening leather, and she's really compared to. She lives in the meatpacking district of New York, and there's all these carcasses strung up and everything, and she lives in this very sort of almost quite masculine apartment, it's devoid of decoration. And so she's really kind of quite shown to be this dominant character. But then when you strip it down, she just becomes kind of weakened and more obsessive. And yeah, it's interesting, that twist, that change in her character.
Yeah, she sort of lives in the sort of place that Michael Douglas would live in Black Rain, he is,
Yeah. It's like a hipster bachelor pad kind of place.
Absolutely, yes. Stripped down, and you just can't believe anybody could actually afford it. What does she do again? She's a publisher, and she affords it.
She works in publishing. She works in publishing, and he's a lawyer in publishing, and she was like one of the editors, I think.
Right. And so the two of them, Glenn Close and Michael Douglas, kind of pop up quite frequently in this book, because Michael Douglas especially seemed to be the poster boy for anti-woke before the thing even existed.
That's right, yeah. I mean, because when he made Falling Down, which was I think, was that 93, 94 maybe? That was very much the kind of white collar worker who's had enough. He goes on a bit of a rampage because he's just fed up with society and life. And I think there was one scene where he takes exception to the way that McDonald's advertises their burgers or something. I remember that one. But so he's basically speaking for everybody. He's fed up with modern society, and he goes on this big rampage because it's all about sort of how men have had enough, and they're hard done by. And that theme was also in Disclosure as well, which was 95, I think. And he goes on a bit of a rant about how it's women who are kind of have it easy, and it's the men who are suffering. And so, and I think these were kind of, I'm sure I don't think Michael Douglas is particularly this bad guy, but I think that was his sort of preoccupation, that he thinks that, he'd probably say that woke madness has gone too far. That's kind of what he would have said back in the 90s.
I mean, I actually had the pleasure of interviewing him a few weeks ago. And he's very nice. He's a very liberal. He's actually a very liberal bloke. I think what he would say in his own defense is probably that he was often playing people he considered villains that
Okay.
society turned into heroes. So, you know, his most famous role is Gordon Gekko. And he was like, I'm playing a villain. I'm not, this isn't meant to be a nice guy. And then society somehow went, oh, you know, he would meet these Wall Street traders who would all be adoring of him because they're like, oh, I came to Wall Street because of Gordon Gekko in Wall Street. And he would be like, but I was playing the villain. You're not supposed to like him. Greed is good was not supposed to be like a bumper sticker. It was. So I think his career has been somewhat, you know, I mean, I do like Falling Down a lot. I'm not going to eulogize him as this great sort of liberal actor or anything, but yeah, there is this ambiguity I feel a little bit about him that he's. But I totally. Disclosure. I'm not going to spend any time defending. Basic Instinct, I think, is one of those films which is much more interesting. But I was really appalled to find out that again, there's a sort of Maria Schneider situation with the actual making of that film.
Right, the leg crossing scene. Yeah, it's interesting when Sharon Stone talks about it in her memoir. And yeah, basically she didn't know that they were going to be doing that shot, and she only found out in a meeting with lots of other people, like you know, lawyers and various people who are involved in the film. And but she said that she had basically a choice: either she could demand that it's removed, or she just goes with it, and she decided to go with it. So. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, and I don't think Michael Douglas obviously didn't have anything to do with that particular thing. So yeah, I don't want to be too hard on him, because actually I do think he seems like I quite like him. I think he seems like a fair guy. So I was definitely not trying to be hard on him.
The Sharon Stone situation I remember that coming out, and it got a lot of criticism because of the depiction of, Catherine Tremell, the character that Sharon Stone is playing, is bisexual, and so I think it got a lot of grief from the gay community, which I think baffled Paul Verhoeven, because as someone who's Dutch, it's just like, why are you, as far as he's concerned, he's made gay films prior to this. He's not someone who is he sees it in a broader context than perhaps the Americans who were watching.
Yeah, I think Joe Esterhaz was probably baffled by it as well. But it just seemed to strike a nerve. I think this idea that gay characters are always the villains, and I think particularly maybe in the early 90s, that kind of touched a nerve with what was going on at the time. More sort of drive for gay rights and all that kind of thing. And I think there wasn't so much representation. So I think people thought, well, if we're going to have any characters from our community, I think, do they always have to be villains? I think because I suppose it's true, it is always kind of the gay characters who were often treated as villains.
Yeah, they were either comic or it's either Martin Short camping it up, or or someone Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs or something.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So as we get, after Fatal Attraction, and Fatal Attraction is massively successful commercially, it generates a huge conversation. How does it perform critically? Is it a bit of a mixed bag critically?
It actually got good reviews. A lot of the reviews were really about its representation of the sensational aspect of it. But it got good reviews. It got Oscar nominations. Critically it did really well. And it was just a real sort of cultural turning point, if that's the right word, cultural touchstone, I suppose. It was just one of those films that really catches on, like it's just discussed everywhere. Saturday Night Live, it's there's always articles of the real life fatal attractions and people giving their stories about their own experiences. So it was just one of those films that really touched a nerve, and everyone was talking about it.
And like any film that does that, it sort of spurred lots of sort of copycat films or films of a similar ilk. You could almost say a sort of mini genre in itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it took a couple of years, I think, but it was by the start of the 90s, there were all these films that were very similar. So it was Presumed Innocent, And then, which was kind of a similar theme of the sort of the affair and the man having the affair and the manipulative single woman. But then it's got quite an interesting twist. And then you had films like the kind of what they call the films that are called the blank from hell genre, which is one of my favorite genres of movie. And it was started with Sleeping with the Enemy, even though it doesn't really have the psychotic woman, it's got the psychotic husband, but it's interesting because that used that sort of jump scare at the end, and it's got similar sort of themes to it and similar set pieces as well.
Yeah, it's almost like the blank from hell always. I mean, that thing of like they're dead, they're not dead, is like it kind of almost suggests that the blank from hell or the single woman or the psycho, whatever, it has a supernatural element to it, because it's kind of like the Carrie effect of spoiler for Carrie, but something happens at the end that suggests Carrie might not be dead.
Right. Yeah. So there's definitely that supernatural element of you think that they're dead, but they're not. They always come back for a second go, which is now a complete cliche. And I think they thought it was a cliche back then as well, back in like 1992, where they were all doing it. So Unlawful Entry, Single White Female, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. I love all those movies, but they definitely were cliche ridden.
Well, is there a favourite one that you'd sort of like recommend that you sort of think?
I saw The Hand That Rocks the Cradle at the cinema, but I must have been 12 or 13. Because I just started getting to films. I was reading Empire magazine, and I wanted to see all these films that I wasn't really allowed to see because I was too young. But I remember getting to go into The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. I don't know how they let us, but we went along to see it, and that's got a special place in my heart. I just really like that one. And Single White Female, which again I suppose is like Bunny Boiler in that it's coined an expression, the single white female, again a sort of slightly stalkerish single woman.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing there is that it's the white that you point out, which had never occurred to me. It's like, why would you put that on an advert that you're white?
I know, it's so funny. Yeah, you just would not do that now.
No. Single white female seeks another white person, a Viking maybe. Sydney Sweeney, where are you?
I know, it's just so wrong now, isn't it, when you think about it? And apparently Whoopi Goldberg took exception to that, so she said that she was going to audition for one of the parts, and
rightly so. Except there's the Whoopi Goldberg went out with Ted Danson briefly. They were a couple. I don't know, it might not have been that brief. It might have been about a year or two actually.
Yeah.
And for her birthday party, Ted Danson turned up in blackface. I like, as a minstrel, I shit you not. Google it. If you think people get cancelled and all the rest of it, people get away with so much. It's not quite as stringent as you might think. I love those thrillers. I know what you mean. They're so appealing. They're so wrong, but in a way, their wrongness is kind of right as well. There's an element of we do fear things, which we politically we're going, no, this isn't correct, but at the same time, that is scary.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think there's also a nice gloss to them as well. So there's kind of I think they sort of tap into a kind of like this sort of wish fulfillment, because they have these, it's like architecture porn, beautiful homes, and it's like the domestic setting. But then you have this sort of evil that's infiltrating this kind of beautiful house. I guess at the time it tapped into the sort of fears of the early 90s, of what was happening at home, increased crime rates, all that kind of thing, instability of family life, just changes in society. So maybe that's why more recently we've had a bit of a resurgence of those kind of films, because it's the same sort of fears maybe, and also this kind of wish fulfillment too.
Yeah, it's always the sort of thing that you're kind of, I always wonder about Freud as well, the nightmare is your fantasy disguised. So it's sort of like, maybe you want the nutty woman in your life, or you want the the nanny to become crazy.
Yeah, well, yeah, it could be.
It's liberating.
Yes.
But of course, one of the aspects of the book that I really found fascinating, and I really enjoyed it, really deepened. And I mean, enjoyed may be the wrong word, really, but you write about yourself quite personally in the book, and you sort of tie the themes of the book and the themes of those films with your own experiences, romantically, intimately, and which have not always been positive.
Yeah, I decided to do it as a bit of a memoir as well. So yeah, that was I exposed myself a little bit. But yeah, it kind of made sense in my head about how those kind of came together. And yeah, I thought it was interesting to use examples of my sort of slightly fraught love life and kind of. But I suppose just this idea that we're always, I suppose, told certain messages and how that impacts on us in real life. And I thought that was kind of interesting to explore that. This idea of, so one of the examples that I can think of is saying things like, or putting up with being in a bad relationship. And I did this for about 6 years. I was in a really not a good relationship. And I think it's this fear of when you're a woman and you're approaching your late 30s, it's really terrifying to think, if I'm suddenly single, what am I going to do? And I had that fear. And also this idea that if you complain too much, you kind of get called crazy, or you get called a nag, and you don't want to be the bunny boiler. So sometimes we put up with a lot of bad things because of this bunny boiler trope. We want to be the cool girl. We don't want to be like this kind of the psycho.
Yeah, and you actually get sort of, Sex in the City and like 10 Ways to Lose a Guy, and, he's really not that into you, sort of playing into some of those fears, but also sort of negotiating with them. And then you get things like Fleabag and sort of even more recent ways of trying to deal. Well, I mean, you're better at explaining this than I am. I should shut up and just let you explain it.
Well, okay, I'll try. Yeah. It's interesting when you come into the 2010s. There's a bit of a shift, and it coincides with is it the third wave of feminism, or is it fourth wave of feminism? Where we really have
you're not going to get me mansplaining feminism to you, Caroline. I saw that trap, and I give you
permission to mansplain. I think it's fourth wave of feminism, where you get women who are now kind of owning their messiness, and and so you see that with Fleabag, with the TV series Girls, films like Girl on the Train, Gone Girl. These really kind of messy, chaotic, kind of violent, dangerous, alcoholic, all these kind of negative things, but it's sort of very sympathetic. And okay, maybe Gone Girls isn't quite so sympathetic, but yeah, Girl on the Train. And I find that really interesting, because it was almost like women sort of taking ownership of that crazy stereotype and saying, yeah, I'm messy, yeah, I drink too much, yeah, I do, all this. And it's just much more sympathetic, and also kind of giving a diagnosis as well for like what's what's troubling them. I think in Fatal Attraction, the flaw was she was really sort of two-dimensional in her wickedness, and when basically she's got quite a lot to be justifiably annoyed at, because she's pregnant and she's been rejected by this guy, and so I think by the time we come to the 2010s, it's a lot more. There's more of an explanation as well, and just really kind of owning that anger too. I think women were kind of holding in this anger, and then they were just letting it out, and this was expressed in a lot of television series that were written by women and films that were written by women. And I mentioned Promising Young Woman because I thought that was a really great example of this idea of it now manifesting as revenge on men, and men who take advantage of women, but in this kind of fun, sort of colourful way, but it's got that edge to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And there's also this sense of, in that film in particular, that there's almost a limit to the fantasy of revenge. Exactly.
It's almost like, because alongside that is there was also this trend for films like Lucy with Scarlett Johansson, and like what else?
Atomic Blonde with Charlize Theron.
Yeah, the ones where it's like an female assassin she's doing all these kind of really cool things, you know, and you sort of want to be this person because she's like kicking butt, you know, and just being really tough and really cool. So there's the whole genre of movies like that, which I really like. But I think Promising Young Woman is interesting because it's like, well, actually, that's not really achievable for, like, you might want to, you have this fantasy of doing all these kind of things, but actually in reality, that doesn't really, it's not going to work out in such a way, and it's got quite a sort of dark twist at the end to it.
I suddenly started thinking as well of Aubrey Plaza, as one is wont to do, as that sort of kind of new versions of women all the time. Of course there are. That's a silly thing to think, you know, there are as many versions of women as there are individual women, you know. But what I mean is sort of culturally as well, there are people who just don't fit in those slots. And you know, I was trying to think, what was the name of that Aubrey Plaza film where she's like a criminal and she
Emily the Criminal.
Yeah, Emily the Criminal. There you go. That's that's such a brilliant film, and it's so kind of doesn't fit anything that I've seen before, which is always a wonderful thing for a film to do. She's even very good in Megalopolis, which, my God, that's not an easy thing to.
Oh, I've not seen that. Ingrid Goes West. That's another fascinating one. So it's like the kind of this woman who we're seeing it from her point of view, where she's being a stalker and she's just doing these really kind of creepy things, but it's all coming from her point of view, and so we feel sympathy for her and we get this understanding of why she's doing these things.
And you sort of get it as well to some extent with Elizabeth Moss throughout actually quite a few of her roles, both in television and in film. There's those brilliant films she did with Alex Ross Perry, Queen of Earth, but there's also in her TV series appearance, obviously Handmaid's Tale, but even in Mad Men, I think Mad Men, we think Don Draper is the star, but actually by the end of the series, we're really watching Peggy, Elizabeth Moss's character.
And she gets, and in the first series, she gets really kind of treated badly by the guy. Can't remember his name.
Pete.
Is it Pete?
Yeah. He's horrible.
You know, she ends up giving her baby up for adoption, and she gets treated really badly. But so we want her to succeed in the face of all the kind of just everything that we told her back. Naturally, she actually overcomes it.
And now making her way in a man's world, and a sort of how that works with female solidarity, and that's fascinating. It's a fascinating, that TV show. I think it has some fascinating things to say. So in terms of now, we've talked about Fleabag. I think you mentioned Michaela Cole's TV.
Yeah, I Will Destroy You.
That's right, yes.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that show, because that feels like that's almost on the leading edge of where we're going now. So I mentioned that one. So I remember that was during lockdown that came out, and I just thought it was just amazing. But it again taps into this kind of woman who she's a writer, and she goes out on a night out, and then she gets somebody puts something in her drink, and she's raped when she's unconscious, and she's piecing it all together. But because of this trauma, she becomes really sort of slightly unstable as well, and it's about how she overcomes that. And then there's kind of at the end, she has these kind of fantasies of her revenge, about what she would do, and it's and you see these kind of different versions of what she has imagined she'll do to this guy, and some of that's very similar to Promising Young Woman, actually, which I thought was interesting that they both came out at the same time and both deal with similar themes. Sort of Dante's Peak and Volcano. It's something's in the water. No, that's a trivial comparison. I apologize.
But that's it.
Turning back just a little bit, because I don't want to shortchange as well the sense that you approach this as a sort of memoir. I think that's really interesting from the point of view that it sort of de-abstracts the arguments that you're making, because you're saying this has real world, how we talk and think and imagine relationships and just being in the world has a real impact. I remember reading, I think it might have been, I'm not sure if it was Dorothy Park or Patricia Highsmith or so, but it was someone, a really good woman writer, wrote this piece about how she wanted just to go to a bar and chat with the guys and not have to worry about sex being in the way all the time.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And just living without having to think about, And I remember one of my female friends, I was telling her about having a situation where when I lived in Liverpool, I had a nasty habit of getting mugged on a relatively regular basis, and it just had an effect of sort of making me a little bit scared of going out.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Yeah,
quite understandable.
As a friend of mine said, I had a very slappable face at the time, which was harsh but fair. And I would say, I found myself plotting where I would go, the route and where it would take me past and things like that. And my friend said, "Oh, welcome to being a woman." And I thought, yes, I see exactly what you mean. So I sort of, when I was reading your pieces, those pieces in particular, I was sort of thinking, we do sometimes take things very lightly, and then yeah, and that's not to say you can't reclaim them and take them as entertainment as well, but they can affect the way you think about yourself in a way that is negative or destructive, or other people think about you.
Yeah. I think, so like when I was younger, I don't think I really thought about the kind of the danger or these, like I did a lot of traveling by myself, and I think I was always surprised when I found myself like, okay, that was maybe a bit dangerous. And so I think I kind of always went through with this slight sort of naivety, actually. But I think this idea of, like, I don't understand why can't a woman go and like have a drink at a bar and not be a big thing. But sometimes I do think, I've been in that situation where, you're maybe judged a little bit more, or people think you're there for a purpose. And it's like, well, no, I just wanted to kind of sit and maybe chat, but not chat in a kind of way that you think I just want to chat with people to find out about them. Because, I'm in a foreign place, I'm in a different city or whatever. Right. So it's interesting then, I think, but there's all that dynamic, and that's explored in quite a few movies, like Looking for Mr. Goodbar with Diane Keaton, which was really like, when it came out, it really like hit home with people. That was one of those films that's like just had a massive impact that we maybe I don't think it's quite so well known, but at the time it had like a really big impact, and it was Madonna based a music video for a song called Bad Girl in the 90s, which was directed by David Fincher, actually, that music video. But that was based on Looking for Mr. Goodbar. And the themes of The Accused as well tie into that. Yeah,
there were a couple. I remember Extremities coming out as well around about, say, a little bit before Accused, with Farrah Fawcett, I think.
Oh, okay. I've not seen that one.
Yeah, it's another. It's like those were the two. This is going to sound an awful way of putting it, but those were the two big rape movies of of that period, Right. I remember reading as well about the making of The Accused, and Jodie Foster said she had to go out every night and go to a disco and just dance in the middle of people, because she spent all day in this horrible situation, in this horrible character, and she just had to keep reconnecting to people. Otherwise,
I read an interview with her where she was talking about how she's really relate to this character who just wants to put on her favorite song and dance and enjoy herself, and she doesn't realize that what that will result in and what that means, and because she's got that naivety as well, I think. And that, it was interesting when I was researching and I was looking back at articles, and it's just articles of the time, and it's interesting what reporters, how they report on rape at the time, and that idea of, well, what was she wearing, or what did she do, and the blame that's put there, and that was really like something that was how people discussed it back then. And I can remember those conversations when I was like in my when I was about 12 or 13. I can remember those kind of conversations in the papers, or just hearing them.
When I came to Italy in 1999, there was a controversy in the newspaper because, and to give the Italian system credit where it's due, it was a controversy. It wasn't like this was something that was being accepted by everybody. But a judge had pronounced that a woman couldn't be raped if she was wearing jeans, because she'd have to help the man. She'd have to somehow take off the jeans, and that would show consent. And it was just like, I mean, it was hugely controversial, and that's why I remember it. But that a judge could feel that was something they could say out loud in a court of law and base their judgment on it was also indicative of how things were still, still then very bad. And, as you said earlier, I think nowadays, and I think you bring this up in the book as well, the tradwife genre or phenomenon, or I'm not even sure what you would want to call it, seems to be yet another backlash.
Yeah, I guess what you call it, maybe a internet subculture or a social media subculture, maybe. I don't know. I guess that's what you call it. But this idea of the promotion of the trad wife, which is one of those ones which is kind of the women who are really successful on Instagram, like this woman called Ballerina Farm, and there's another one on TikTok. Can't remember her name, but she does like these kind of makes these ridiculous, like she makes her own cheese, for example, or like she makes her toast. She's got to make a toastie for her kids, so she bakes the bread and makes her own cheese for it,
like from her body. There you go. There's another inappropriate comment. I apologize. No, obviously from milk. That's
from milk. Yes.
Yeah. Cow or goat's milk, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yes, I assume so. They, that's obviously their job. So that, they probably spend a lot of time making those videos and doing that. So they're actually working. So this idea that they're not working, that they're just devoting themselves to their family, is not quite true. So yeah.
The internet not being quite true. This is a bombshell that you've just exploded. No, absolutely. No, I think that's. I mean, I think this is the big question I got reading your book, or the question that it not of the book, but that it provokes in me is, if there are going to be these backlashes all the time, if feminism is always going to be going too far, no matter how far it goes, isn't it just worth being as progressive and as radical as possible? Because you're never going to please this part of society which is always going to be reactionary no matter what you do.
Yeah, I mean, that would be sort of ideal, I suppose, wouldn't it? I mean, it'd be nice if we could all sort of meet in the middle, but I guess everything just kind of, there's always this ebb and flow, and it's like the sort of two sides always trying to sort of find dominance. You push in one direction and the other direction pushes back, and it's a shame we can't just sort of meet in the middle somewhere. But yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I'm a great. I think meeting in the middle has got us where we are today, which is the Overton window, including Nazis, and that's not.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like.
Yeah. But some people are never going to want to be progressive because they think it's a weakness, or they think that it's not to their advantage, and and a lot of it's obviously driven by ulterior motives. And
well, as they seem to be so damned keen on going to Mars, I suggest we allow them the liberty to do that, and we'll stay behind on Earth and see if we can fix the mess they created.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know, it just gets very depressing.
It does, doesn't it? Let's move swiftly on. So I would love to ask for a final recommended book, Caroline. If you said earlier off mic that you've been reading a lot of books recently, a lot of film books recently. So
so I was just trying to think about what ones. So what ones I've got. I've just read this one about Hitchcock's Frenzy, which was actually pretty good. So that was.
Oh, that's an interesting film in terms of misogyny as well, because that's
absolutely
he really let it show on that one.
Yeah, I actually really like Frenzy. It's I think it's interesting because it taps into cinema in the early 1970s, and it was about how Hitchcock was trying to keep on top of New Hollywood, and he was trying to find ways to kind of keep up with these other directors like Wes Craven. Some people, you might argue as well that Hitchcock always wanted to see what he could get away with Psycho and his other movies, and finally, with the collapse of the production code, he could really just show exactly what he wanted. But yeah, it's basically his last great work. And so I enjoyed reading this book, which was about the making of it. Raymond Fury. So yeah.
Oh, right. I think that's such a good way of putting it. I think that's really interesting, because you're so many of those like directors who have already made their names by the 50s as, I mean, God, Hitchcock starts in the silence. They would sort of tend to be sort of appalled by the loosening of certain strictures. But you're right, Hitchcock is kind of like, no, if I could get away with it, I'd do this, and this as well. You know, I'd...
yeah. I mean, yeah, and that's what, he wanted to show what as much as he could in Psycho, and he's always wanted to push the boundaries there. Some people, would say that it's because, he's a dirty old man and all those kind of things. But I think I'm generous to him in that I feel that it was more about, he always wanted just to keep up with filmmaking and always, he made films for his audience. So he wanted to provide things for his audience. And he knew that the audience were after sex, they were after violence. It was the teenage audiences. Driving was booming, and people wanted to see what they couldn't see on television, and that shock value I think he was interested in as well.
I mean, does that follow as well to some degree with, like, the audiences that are going to see Fatal Attraction and a lot of these thrillers, they're made up of as many women as they are men. They're not, solely men going to see these films. So are women coming away from those films going, yeah, we like the family, that Burn the Witch, or are they looking at it and going, oh, that's actually a very powerful, transgressive character, even maybe not necessarily consciously thinking that, but it's touching those buttons as well?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there's a sort of masochism in that I think a lot of women do love to hate other women and want to see the downfall of characters like that. But at the same time, I think when you watch it, you feel sympathy. And I think probably a lot of women at the time when they watched it in the cinema, they were kind of like, oh, wow, okay, I've done the same thing. And they cringed a little bit too. And they felt like it was unfair how she was treated. So I think it was really a mix. And I think the audience would have been made up of majority of women, possibly. I think it's one of those films that would appeal as much to women as men, maybe to more so to women. And that's something that Hitchcock actually always said, that he always believed that it was women who made the decisions on what to go and see in the cinema. So even if it was like a date situation, it was the women who would sort of make the choice of what film to go and see. So he often said that he made films to appeal to women. And I think Fatal Attraction is one of those films that's kind of, I would say, appeals to women, even though it's got this kind of negative portrayal. I think it's still something quite sort of delicious about watching it as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, Adrian Lyne is one of those guilty pleasures, isn't he? I mean, he's a definition of guilty pleasure, sort of like slick and steamy. I loved what you said about him having this sort of filming this kind of British dream of what New York must be like rather than actually New York.
I think so, yeah, because I read this interview with Ridley Scott where he was talking about Thelma and Louise, and he said that Thelma and Louise is so like, just really captures Americana. And so that's coming from this kind of British eye. He's capturing all these little things that maybe an American wouldn't necessarily think about, but which you kind of romanticize. And I think Adrian Lyne does the same thing with New York. He captures all these things that make it an exciting city. And that's why I also like Fatal Attraction, because it's really like a kind of time capsule of New York in the 1980s, and those publisher parties and smoking in bars and just this kind of glitz to
it. Smoking is crazy in the 80s. Like Gremlins, they're smoking in a children's film. It's like crazy.
Oh, I know, it's crazy. I know.
Absolutely nuts. And so what's your next project, Caroline? You've finished this book, which is published I think in September, so I'm not sure when will come out, but in the UK it's published in September. It's already been published in the United States. What's your next project?
So I have a Hitchcock book that should be out next year. So kind of looking at costumes in Hitchcock films. So that's the next one. And I've got a few ideas for other books that I'm just going to take my time to work on, I think. So
percolating.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I always have lots of ideas, but I've just got to try and sort of work out how to put them together.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, you have to. An open invitation is on the table for whenever you wish to come and talk to us about them.
Thank you very much. It's been great to chat with you.